I had always known my life would follow a certain path. Born into a powerful political family, I was raised with the heavy weight of tradition and expectation. My family had a name that commanded respect, and my future was clear. I would continue their legacy, rise to power, and maintain our status in a world where religion and authority were inseparable. But one night, everything changed. In the midst of a profound inner struggle, I stumbled upon a truth that challenged everything I had ever believed. It shook me to my core, tore apart the foundations of my life, and led me to make a choice that would change everything. This choice cost me everything: my title, my family, the life I had built. Yet, in exchange, I discovered something I had been searching for my entire life: true freedom. Now I stand in a world that no longer knows me as who I was, but as who I have become. This is my journey, my story of transformation, loss, and ultimately, redemption. I was born into a world that defined who I was before I could even understand the magnitude of it. My family's legacy stretched back for generations, and it was one built on power, influence, and duty. From the outside, we were untouchable, a dynasty that had shaped the political and religious landscape for as long as anyone could remember. My father, a man of great respect and authority, was at the heart of it all, serving as a key figure in our country's leadership. It was his guidance, his strength, that shaped my early years. From a young age, I knew my future was already written. There was no room for deviation. I was expected to follow the path that had been laid out for me, to carry the family name with pride, to fulfill the roles handed down through the generations. The expectations were clear and unwavering. I was to continue the work of my ancestors, serve my country, and uphold the traditions of our people. My life was regimented, structured around the needs of my family and my faith. Every morning began with the same ritual: prayers, followed by a series of meetings, events, and appearances. My days were filled with the pressure of expectations, always watched, always scrutinized. In the walls of our grand house, there was no room for doubt. Every aspect of my life was controlled. My education, my career, even my relationships were all shaped by the weight of legacy and duty. Religion, too, was a central pillar of this life, but it wasn't a religion of love or peace. It was a religion of duty. My family treated it as a means of maintaining order, control, and power. Faith was something to be followed, not questioned. There was no room for personal connection with the divine. It was all about preserving our standing, keeping our reputation intact, and fulfilling our obligations to the family, the country, and the faith. Growing up, I never really knew what it meant to question anything. I was taught that doubt was a sign of weakness, of failure. I saw no room for questioning the values, the teachings, or the beliefs that had been passed down to me. To do so would be to dishonor my family and my legacy. I was told from the moment I could understand that the name I carried was sacred, that my role in the world was to protect and uphold it. The weight of that responsibility was always heavy on my shoulders. It was more than just a name. It was a duty that defined every aspect of my life. Being the eldest son of my father, I was expected to marry well, to secure the family's future, and to take on a leadership role in politics, much like my father had done before me. There was no room for rebellion, no space for dreams that didn't align with what had been set out for me. And yet, as much as I followed the rules, as much as I performed the duties expected of me, there was something inside me that felt empty. Deep within me, there was a quiet ache, a longing for something I couldn't identify. It was a silent rebellion that I kept hidden, even from myself. I didn't know what I was longing for or why I felt this way, but I knew something was missing. I was living a life that everyone around me expected, a life that seemed perfect on the outside but felt hollow on the inside. I spent my days fulfilling my role, marrying into the right family, attending the right events, speaking the right words. But at night, in the silence of my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was missing. I had everything that should have made me happy: status, wealth, respect, but none of it filled the emptiness. I prayed because I was supposed to, but the words I spoke seemed empty, echoing in a space where there was no connection. I followed the teachings of my faith, but the love and peace that were promised seemed to be absent from my life. Instead, I found myself drowning in a sea of expectations and rituals, repeating the motions without ever feeling truly connected to the faith I had been raised to follow. Despite all the appearances of success and fulfillment, I felt isolated. I was surrounded by people, by family, by power, but I felt completely alone. The weight of my family's expectations had left no space for me to find my own path, to figure out who I truly was. I didn't know how to break free from the life that had been designed for me. And so, I lived in silence, with my doubts buried deep inside, never daring to question what I had been taught, never daring to imagine a life different from the one that had been chosen for me. But deep down, I knew there was more to life than this. I knew that something greater was out there, something beyond the walls of duty and expectation. I just didn't know how to find it, or even if I was allowed to search for it. And so, I continued to play the part, praying, leading, following, living a life that felt increasingly disconnected from the truth I was starting to sense somewhere deep within me. It all began when I was given the responsibility of leading a national project, an opportunity that I'd been trained for all my life. The mission required me to travel abroad, a high-profile diplomatic assignment where I was to attend a series of important meetings with foreign leaders. I saw it as my chance to prove myself. My family had always placed the highest expectations on me, and this mission would be my chance to show them that I was capable of carrying the weight of our legacy. I felt a sense of pride, as if I had finally reached a point where my dedication and loyalty to my family would be validated. The thought of representing the family on an international scale gave me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. However, nothing could have prepared me for the encounter that would change everything. While I was abroad, I met a man who stood out in the most unexpected way. He wasn't a diplomat, a politician, or a leader. He was a Christian missionary. At first glance, he didn't seem like someone I would ever be interested in talking to, let alone listen to. He wasn't there to make deals or discuss politics. He was there solely to share his faith. To me, someone who had grown up in a world where religion was strictly a tool for maintaining power and social order, his faith seemed strange and misplaced. The idea of speaking about religion as a personal relationship with God seemed so far removed from the way I had been raised. I dismissed him at first. He was an outsider, someone who was completely different from the people I had known all my life. His beliefs were foreign to me, and I couldn't understand why he would bother talking about love and forgiveness in a world where power, tradition, and duty were everything. Yet as I spent more time with him, something in his words started to stir something deep inside me. His faith wasn't like the dry ceremonial prayers I had recited in mosques, or the rituals I had performed to fulfill my family's obligations. It was vibrant, it was genuine, and it was filled with a kind of hope I had never encountered before. The more I listened, the more my walls began to crumble. He spoke about a relationship with God, not through rules and rituals, but through love and peace. He didn't speak with anger or fear, as I had grown used to hearing in sermons at home. There was no talk of punishment or the wrath of God that had been hammered into me all my life. Instead, he spoke of a God who was kind, compassionate, and forgiving. It wasn't just the words that struck me, but the way he spoke them. There was no judgment, no condemnation, just an invitation to something that felt beyond my understanding. I started questioning everything I had ever been taught. I began to ask myself why the God I had always known seemed so distant, so unreachable. Why was love always mixed with fear? Why was peace always overshadowed by the threat of punishment? It was a world I had lived in for so long, but now, for the first time, it seemed like there was something else, something better. The peace this man spoke of felt like a breath of fresh air, but it was also unsettling. I had spent my whole life building walls around myself, walls to protect me from questions, from doubt, from anything that might disrupt the order of my world. But now, these walls seemed to be crumbling, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it. One night, after a conversation that had gone much deeper than I had anticipated, I sat alone in my room, the words echoing in my mind. The missionary's words lingered in the silence of my thoughts, and I couldn't push them away. He spoke of unconditional love, of a love that didn't demand anything in return, a love that was freely given. It was a love that wasn't based on performance, on rituals, or on fear. It was a love that embraced imperfection and offered forgiveness without conditions. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had heard something that resonated with the deepest parts of my soul. I sat there, feeling a profound shift inside me. It was as if a door had been opened, and I was looking at a world I had never known. The truth of what I had heard felt like an invitation, one that I didn't know how to respond to. I had spent my entire life following a path that had been set out for me, following the rules, doing what was expected, and never straying from the path of duty. But now I was faced with a choice. Could I reject what I was feeling, push it aside as something too dangerous to consider? Or was this something worth pursuing, something that could change the very essence of who I was? I didn't know what to do. I felt torn. I had spent so many years building my life on a foundation of duty and tradition, and now everything seemed uncertain. The certainty I had always clung to felt fragile in the face of what I had just learned. But one thing was clear. Something inside me had changed. I couldn't ignore it, no matter how hard I tried. The path ahead was unclear, but it was the first time I had ever felt like I had a choice in the direction my life would take. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could go back to the way things were before. The days after meeting the missionary were like a storm that I couldn't escape. The words he spoke lingered in my mind like an echo I couldn't shake. Every waking moment, I found myself grappling with a truth that had been hidden from me for so long. I couldn't stop questioning everything. My family, my purpose, the very foundation of the life I had built. I had always been taught to follow, to obey, and to trust in the traditions of my ancestors without ever questioning them. It was all about submission. Submission to family, submission to faith, submission to the expectations that had been placed on me since birth. But now, after hearing the message of love, peace, and forgiveness, I found myself wondering if what I had been taught was wrong. What if everything I had believed was based on fear, on control, rather than love? I couldn't help but compare the faith I had known to the faith I was now hearing about. The more I thought about it, the more the contrast became glaringly clear. My faith, the faith that had been instilled in me from the moment I was born, was rooted in fear. It was about adhering to rules, about performing rituals, about doing what was expected of me so that I could avoid punishment. But the faith I had just been introduced to was different. It was about love, acceptance, and grace, things that I had never fully understood before. How could I reconcile these two vastly different approaches to life? How could I stay loyal to the teachings that had shaped my identity for so long when I now felt like I was drowning in uncertainty? The internal struggle became unbearable. Every part of me wanted to shut the door on these new feelings, to ignore the sense of peace I had felt when listening to the missionary. I tried to convince myself that I was just confused, that this wasn't the truth. But no matter how hard I tried, the truth wouldn't go away. It lingered, whispering to me in quiet moments, telling me that there was something more. I couldn't deny it. The more I tried to push it away, the more it pushed back. My family's expectations felt like an anchor around my neck. I was the eldest son, the heir to a legacy that was built on political power, tradition, and unquestioning faith. The weight of that expectation pressed down on me every day. I was supposed to follow in my father's footsteps, to continue the family's work, to represent our legacy with honor and pride. To question my faith was to risk losing everything. It was a betrayal not just of my family, but of the very foundation of my identity. How could I walk away from all of that? How could I throw away the life I had been groomed to lead for something as intangible and risky as love and peace? But the more I tried to silence the questions, the louder they became. They started to invade every corner of my mind, popping up at the most unexpected times. I found myself sneaking into private spaces, places where I could read and listen to ideas that challenged everything I had been taught. I started reading books on spirituality, on different faiths, searching for something that might offer me a different perspective. I listened to messages that spoke of unconditional love, forgiveness, and grace. Every time I did, it felt like I was taking a step further away from everything I had known. But each step felt like a step closer to something I couldn't name, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I wanted to stop. I wanted to return to the safety of certainty, to the comfort of tradition. The life I had known was structured, predictable, and secure. But something inside me wouldn't let me go back. It was as if a door had been opened and I couldn't close it. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I knew that I couldn't turn away. Every time I read, every time I listened, I felt like I was getting closer to something real, something I'd been searching for my whole life. The pressure from my family only increased as I became more distant. I started to withdraw, spending more time alone, avoiding the public appearances and the rituals that had once been so important to me. My father, ever observant, noticed the change in me, but he attributed it to the pressures of leadership, the weight of responsibility that came with being the heir to our family's legacy. He couldn't have known that I was struggling with something much deeper, something that challenged the very core of my existence. He had no idea that I was beginning to question the faith that had been the cornerstone of both his life and mine. I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me. How could I tell him that the foundation of everything I had believed in was crumbling, that the faith I had lived by was no longer enough? I couldn't. I couldn't find the words to explain how I felt, and I couldn't bear the thought of betraying my family. So I kept it inside. I kept the questions, the doubts, and the longing buried deep within me. I carried them alone, even as my life continued to move forward as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I wasn't the same person I'd been before. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing, pushing me toward a truth I was terrified to face. The moment of reckoning had arrived. I had been avoiding it for months, trying to suppress the doubts that gnawed at my soul. But that night, as I stood before my family, leading the evening prayers as I had done so many times before, everything felt different. The familiar words, the rituals, the motions I had been repeating for years. All of it felt hollow. The recitations that once filled me with a sense of duty and connection now left me empty. I could feel the distance growing, the space between me and the words I was speaking widening with every breath. As I stood there, surrounded by my family, I realized something that had been slowly building inside me. I could no longer pray with the same sincerity I once had. My mind wandered. My thoughts drifted away from the ritual, and I found myself questioning the very faith I had followed for so long. The verses I recited, the prayers I had memorized, all of it felt like a performance, a mask I had worn for years to maintain my place in the world. But in that moment, I knew I was no longer pretending. I wasn't just doubting anymore. I was on the verge of rejecting everything I had been taught. I looked around at my family, at the faces of my father, my brothers, the people who had shaped me, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. These people were my world. They were the reason I had lived my life the way I did, fulfilling every expectation, every duty. To them, faith was a matter of survival, of upholding the family name, of ensuring that we stayed in power. It was about control, not connection. And for so long, I had been willing to play my part. But now, I realized that I was living a lie. The very faith I had been raised in, the one I had thought was my foundation, was built on fear, not love. It was about obeying orders, following traditions, and keeping the peace at all costs. But in that moment, I knew that peace wasn't the same as truth. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that this was the life I wanted. I had spent my entire life following rules, submitting to expectations, trying to honor a legacy that was based on fear and control. I had lived in the shadow of my family's power, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid of what might happen if I stepped out of line. But I had seen something else, something more beautiful, more freeing than I had ever known. I had glimpsed a love that didn't come with conditions, a peace that wasn't dependent on power or status. I couldn't ignore it. It had become a part of me, and it was stronger than everything I had been taught. The truth I had discovered was too powerful to ignore. It had taken root in me, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The path I had been on, the path my family had set for me, was no longer one I could walk. I had come to a breaking point. I knew I had to make a choice. It wasn't just about faith anymore. It was about who I was, who I wanted to be, and what I believed in. I had to choose between the life I had known and the truth that had opened up before me. I couldn't stay in this world of fear, of expectations, of unspoken rules. The truth was calling me, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. But the choice I had to make was terrifying. I knew what it would cost me. I would lose everything: my title, my place in the family, my reputation, my legacy. To choose truth meant walking away from the life I had built, from the world I had known. My family would never accept this. I would be cast out, branded a traitor, a rebel. I would lose the love and approval of the people I had always looked up to. But even knowing all of this, I couldn't turn back. The weight of that truth was too much to bear, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I chose love over fear. I chose truth over tradition. I chose to live honestly, even if it meant leaving everything behind. In that moment, I knew that the life I had known was over. I was about to lose everything, but I was also about to gain something I had never had before: freedom. Freedom from fear, from expectation, from the chains that had bound me to a life of submission and control. The decision was final. I knew it would change everything. I would never again be the person I had been, never again live in the world I had known. But in choosing the truth, I had found something worth more than anything I had ever been taught. Something worth more than family, more than legacy, more than title. I had found peace. And though the cost was unimaginable, I knew it was the only choice I could make. The aftermath of my decision was swift and brutal. I was disowned by my family, and the consequences were far-reaching. In an instant, I was stripped of everything: my title, my inheritance, my position. I was no longer the eldest son of a royal family, the heir to a legacy built on power and influence. That life, which I had once thought was everything, was now a distant memory. The rejection was not just personal, it was public. The family's name, which had once commanded respect, now carried with it shame and dishonor. I was labeled a traitor, an apostate, someone who had betrayed everything I was born to represent. My name was erased from their history. At first, I felt the weight of the loss with a depth I hadn't expected. The loneliness was suffocating. Everywhere I went, I was reminded of what I had left behind, what I had chosen to give up. The life I had known, the comforts of privilege, the respect, the adoration, gone in a single decision. It felt as though the world had turned its back on me. But what I hadn't anticipated was the freedom that came with it. In the silence of my new life, away from the chaos of family, politics, and religious expectations, I began to feel something I had never truly felt before. Peace. The peace of being free. Free from the weight of tradition. Free from the constant pressure to conform, to uphold a name that no longer had meaning to me. I was no longer bound by the need to prove myself, to live up to the image of a man my family wanted me to be. For the first time, I could breathe. I could exist without being defined by the expectations of others. But that freedom came with its own struggles. The loneliness was deep. I found myself questioning my decision, wondering if I'd been too hasty, too eager to leave everything behind. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. The isolation felt suffocating, and there were days when I doubted whether I could continue down this path. My former life, even with all its chains, had been familiar, and the unknown of this new existence was terrifying. Yet, in that darkness, I began to discover something new, something I had never known before. I began to understand what true freedom meant. It wasn't just about escaping from the life I had known. It was about embracing a new identity, one that wasn't based on power, title, or legacy, but on something far deeper and more enduring: love, grace, and truth. As I walked this new path, I began to see the world in a way I had never seen before. I began to understand that my worth was not tied to my family name or my social status, but to something far greater than anything I had ever known. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were days when I was overwhelmed with grief and longing for the life I'd left behind. I missed my family, even though they had cast me out. I missed the familiarity of my past, the certainty that came with knowing who I was supposed to be. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I began to build a new life, one that wasn't based on the fleeting power of status, but on the eternal power of love and truth. I found peace in my new identity, one that was rooted in something unshakable. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of doubt, but I began to realize that this journey was shaping me into the person I had always been meant to be. I was no longer defined by the family I'd been born into or the expectations of the world around me. I was free to choose my own path, to live a life of purpose, a life that aligned with the truth I had discovered. In the quiet moments when the world felt still, I could feel the weight of my decision lifting. I had chosen a life of love, of grace, and of truth. And as I embraced that choice, I began to feel the peace that had always eluded me. It wasn't a peace that came from comfort or success, but a peace that came from within, from knowing that I was living authentically, that I was walking the path I was meant to walk. The loss was real, but it was also a necessary step in my transformation. It was a loss that led to a greater gain, a life filled with purpose, with clarity, and with a peace that no title or inheritance could ever provide. My journey was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. A path that led not to power or status, but to something far more valuable: true freedom. As I stand here now, reflecting on the life I once led, the contrast could not be clearer. The man I was then, the one driven by titles, legacy, and the expectations of family, seems like a distant memory, a life I've shed, piece by piece. I have learned, through the trials and pain, that my true identity is not defined by the power I once held or the name I was born into. My identity is rooted in something far deeper, something unshakable. It is found in the love of a God who calls me his own, a love that transcends titles, bloodlines, and legacy. I have come to understand that true peace and freedom do not come from external validation or societal status. They come from within, from the quiet assurance that I am loved for who I truly am, not for what I can offer or what I've inherited. The more I reflect on my journey, the more I realize that the pain I once felt, the loss of my family, my title, my position, has been a necessary sacrifice. For it is in this sacrifice that I found the most profound freedom. I have discovered a new purpose, one that has nothing to do with power or influence. My mission now is not to serve a kingdom or uphold a family name. My mission is to serve others, to share the truth I have discovered, and to help others find the peace and freedom that I have been so graciously given. I once thought that my worth was tied to what I could do for my family, for my country, for the legacy that had been passed down to me. Now I understand that my worth is not in what I do, but in who I am. And who I am, I know now, is a beloved child of God. I have found purpose in helping others who, like me, feel trapped by the expectations of their families or their own doubts. I have met so many who are afraid to speak the truth, to live authentically, for fear of rejection or loss. I now stand as a living testimony to the fact that freedom comes when we stop living in fear and begin to embrace the truth. It is not always an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to true peace. And I am committed to walking it. The pain of losing my family will always be a part of my journey. There are days when I long for the relationships I once had, for the love I thought I would always have. There are nights when I think about what could have been if I had chosen differently. But that pain no longer has control over me. I have found peace in the knowledge that I am walking in the truth, that I am following the path that was always meant for me. I have found freedom in the love of God, and nothing can take that away. My new mission is one that I embrace with all my heart. I have been called to speak truth, to serve others, and to share the message of love and grace that has changed my life. This mission is not easy. It requires courage, it requires sacrifice, and it requires a willingness to stand firm in the face of opposition. But I know that this is the path I am meant to walk. It is a path of purpose, a path of peace, and a path of freedom. As I continue on this journey, I am reminded daily that my identity is not rooted in what I once had, but in who I now belong to. I walk with a new identity, one that is unshakable, because it is grounded in something eternal. My mission is clear: to share the love, peace, and freedom that I have found, and to help others discover the same truth that has set me free. I may have lost everything I once held dear, but in return, I have gained something far more precious: a life of purpose, a heart at peace, and a soul that is free. Nothing, not even the loss of my family, can take that away from me. I walk this path with a new mission, a new life, and a new identity, one that is not defined by the world, but by the love and truth of God. And I will continue to walk it, no matter the cost.